Hey everyone! Tonight we dive into the wild world of medieval courtship, where love advice leaned on star charts, pig grease, and sometimes a gemstone. If you think today's dating scene is tricky, picture wooing someone with just a lute and a hope. So, before you settle in, take a second to hit like on this video and subscribe, but only if you truly vibe with my content. Also, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. It's always cool to know who's joining us from across the globe. Now, lower the lights, maybe switch on a fan for that gentle hum, and let's slip into tonight's tale together. In today's dating, we're told eye contact sparks connection. In medieval Europe, it could spark distrust, betrothal deals, or legal trouble, depending on how long you stared. Courtship back then often began with a glance, not a quick peek, but a precisely measured, morally weighted gaze. Too short, and you seemed aloof. Too long, and you were basically proposing or challenging her dad to a fight. Romantic, yet perilous. Courtly love guides urged men to look gently but earnestly, a phrase straight out of a 14th century cologne ad. The perfect stare balanced, "I admire your tapestry skills," with, "I'm not here to seize your castle." One popular manual cautioned against stares that caused flushing, tricky since flushing could stem from heat, ale, or the plague. If a lady blushed, the man had to look away fast, cross himself, and maybe leave town. The church wasn't keen on this. They thought prolonged gazing invited sin and possibly scurvy. Clerics preached that true love came from holy respect, not eye-based flirting. Couples were urged to keep eyes down and words brief. Accidental eye contact in church? That was a scandal. They might as well have shared a bedroll. For noble ladies, eye contact was a minefield. A highborn woman was trained to hold a blank, distant, slightly bored gaze. A stray glance could hint at seduction, sorcery, or a bad lunch, all equally risky. Yet, despite it all, eyes met across feast halls and dusty market stalls. Lovers penned verses about fleeting looks that lasted a heartbeat. Troubadours sang of eyes that stabbed the soul. Poetic force stared a bit too long for etiquette. In the Middle Ages, deodorant didn't exist, unless you count sheer terror, time, or a strong gust. But that didn't stop folks from trying to smell enticing. Dating tips often claimed your romantic fate depended on your scent. Herbs were the medieval fix for both hygiene and charm. To win a partner, you didn't grab perfume. You raided your herb patch or, in a pinch, your stew pot. Men were advised to stuff sage, mint, or rosemary into their cuffs or shoes. Each step past a lady left a whiff of herbal allure. Did it hide the stench of sweat, wool, or goats? Barely, but effort counted. Wealthier men carried pomanders, fancy balls of spices, herbs, or dried lemons, swinging from a belt chain, broadcasting, "I'll bathe someday." Women tucked scented pouches into their bodices, both for aroma and to fend off fleas. Love's easier without pests. Some manuals suggested rubbing herbs on skin, mint for vigor, basil for charm, thyme for courage. One 13th century text swore rubbing sage on your chest bared your heart. Either poetic or horrifying. Someone tried it. Not all scents were equal. Onions signaled strength, but also screamed, "I live in a barn." Breath reeking of ale and salted cod. Just another Wednesday. In medieval times, poetry wasn't just for dreamers. It was a love code, especially for shy nobles with more quills than charisma. But here's the catch. The safest way to woo wasn't praising her beauty or wit. That was too earthly. Instead, you compared her to saints, ideally the Virgin Mary, because nothing says, "I like you" like you're basically divine. Courtly poems were often religious to dodge church wrath or excommunication for lustful rhymes. So, a suitor might write, "O lady, radiant as heaven, thy glance holier than a relic." Sweet, until you realize he's comparing her to a shrine. This led to a genre of romantic bafflement. One moment it's a love note, the next it's fit for a convent. Many nobles hired troubadours to craft poems, balancing passion with legal deniability. The result, songs praising her virtue, her eyes, her piety, but never hinting at sin. Medieval texting was 30 verses of, "I respect you from a distance." Some women replied with their own poems, often blunter. "I like your valor, your manners, and your estate." Still solid standards. Poetry was a safe way to say, "I'm into you," without saying it. Wrap it in Latin, add a holy verse, and claim it was for a saint if it backfired. Say you've penned a heartfelt letter full of pious metaphors and restrained passion. Great job. But you're not done. Now you send it. Yes, in medieval times, a love letter wasn't just words. It was an aromatic event. Perfumed parchment was peak romance and sophistication. While modern lovers spritz cologne, 14th century romantics hit the spice shelf. Cloves, saffron, or rose petals. Maybe nutmeg if you wanted to impress sensitive noses. These weren't just flair, they carried meaning. Saffron meant wealth, cloves devotion, cinnamon desire. By the time the letter reached her, after days in a sweaty saddlebag through rain and mule traffic, it smelled like spiced broth. Some lovers tucked dried violets or sage into the folds. One poor soul used fennel, which she took as an insult unless she was a soup. In grand courts, scrolls were soaked in musk or rose water, not for subtlety but to hit the nose hard. Subtlety wasn't the goal, floral ambush was. Even wax seals were scented with oils, stamped with crests, saying, "My love is real," like this clove-scented wax. Some letters were so spiced they were mistaken for recipes or hexes. One overly fragrant poem reportedly drew rats en route. Love was messy. Modern dating might mean roses, chocolates, or a playlist. In medieval Europe, love often meant a freshly killed forest critter. To prove courage, manliness, and sharp aim, knights gifted their beloveds hunt spoils. Flowers were fine, but a deer's head, still warm, screamed, "I think of you when I hurl spears." This wasn't weird, it was expected. Per 14th century chivalric codes, a man's hunting skill showed his worth as a suitor. Slay a boar, present its tusks on a platter, and you were a medieval heartthrob. Ladies receiving a skinned hare or a brace of pigeons were expected to swoon politely, even if wondering where to stash their fourth carcass that week. Some gifts were symbolic. A dove for peace, assuming it didn't peck anyone. Falcons, tied to nobility, were prized, though they needed feeding and sometimes nipped fingers off. Romantic, humbler men offered squirrels or rabbits. One lovesick tailor gifted a goose, which fled into a well. Love didn't bloom. The ultimate gesture? A ceremonial stag feast, where a knight served a roasted deer in her honor, with music, flattery, and 50 awkward guests. If she was vegetarian or squeamish, a bloody pelt could flop badly. Still, in a world without apps or cafes, a ribbon-wrapped carcass said, "I braved the woods, risked plague, and thought of you." In medieval courtship, bold flattery was dangerous. Calling her beautiful? Too forward. Her smile? Scandalous. Her hair? Risky. It was likely under veils and a halo of piety. So what was safe? Her gloves. Yes. In a world where flirting could spark excommunication, praising her gloves was like whispering sweet nothings while staring at the ground. Gloves weren't just practical, they were style statements. Long, embroidered gloves were all the rage. If she could wear them without tripping into a ditch, that was impressive and marriage-worthy. Complimenting gloves showed respect, keen eyes, and no immediate sinful intent. A 13th century manners guide advised, greet a lady by praising her attire or grace, but let your gaze stay below her wrist, lest you court disgrace. Translation, stick to gloves, avoid trouble. Women might praise a man's belt, especially if it was fine leather, imported from Spain, or didn't reek of horse. It was code. "I see you. You're refined. Let's flirt before my betrophal's set." A glove compliment could lead to a smile, a nod, or, daringly, a return compliment, practically a vow. One record notes a man saying, "Your gloves are finely wrought, your cloak well sewn." 3 months later, wed, with 6 sheep and a field as dowry. In medieval love's tangled dance, saying, "Your gloves are splendid," was the safest, sweetest, weirdest way to say, "I'm smitten." In today's world, timing is key. In medieval times, timing was everything. Astrology, divine will, and possibly why you stayed single. Love manuals. Yes, they existed. Said the perfect moment to confess wasn't when it felt right, but when the stars aligned and Venus wasn't grumpy. A waxing moon, growing larger, signaled luck, growth, and bold confessions. So, if you plan to profess love to the miller's daughter, do it under moonlight, holding a lily or a slightly stunned sparrow. A waning moon, shrinking, was awful for romance. Relationships started then were doomed to fade, like friendships or bad broth. Confess under a waning moon and get rejected? Astrologers would shrug. Told you so. Some went further. Avoid full moons if you're emotional. Eclipses unless you want your love tied to famine or shame. A 14th century monk, likely single forever, warned that confessing under a new moon brought bad luck, tooth decay, and spiritual fog. Someone tried it and got chased by a duck. Coincidence? They thought not. Nobles checked with astrologers before sending love notes or flirting at feasts. Some delayed betrothals for better star alignments. The 1300s version of ghosting by horoscope. I like you, Beatrice, but Mars is in retrograde, so my heart must wait. In a world of shaky hygiene, political plots, and bear attacks, checking the stars before saying, I love you wasn't so odd. Love in medieval times wasn't always left to chance. Sometimes it relied on brews from herbalists, witches, or your aunt's weird friend with a toad collection. Enter the love potion, the medieval cure for shy flirting, rejection, or the question, what if I could make them love me with tea? These concoctions weren't subtle. One recipe mixed honey, sage, and ground stag hoof. Nothing says romance like hoof dust. Others used rosewater, cloves, or oddities like burned feathers. You'd need true love to sip that. Some potions were drunk, others dabbed on clothes or buried under doorsteps. A few were baked into bread, fine until your crush bit into sage and sorrow. Weirder still, recipes with cemetery soil, clipped nails, or fox fat. No foxes, please. Medieval ideas were wild. One 12th century charm suggested chanting over a loaf at dawn, then feeding it to your beloved secretly. Today, that's a lawsuit. Courts sometimes jailed potion makers for enchanting nobles. One lord claimed he was seduced by charmed lavender. Sure, Henry blamed the herbs. Many potions just caused nausea, fainting, or sudden poetry urges. But belief was strong. If someone thought they were bewitched by love, they might act it. Not so different from modern dating after a few drinks. In medieval romance, love wasn't just heart's work. It was about honor, egos, and occasional helmet dents. If another man glanced at your lady too long, etiquette offered two paths: pen a snarky verse or challenge him to a duel. Most picked the latter, quicker, bloodier, chivalrous. Chivalry demanded defending her honor, even if she didn't ask or even noticed. Draw your sword, toss a glove, yes, really, and declare, Sir, your eyes insult my lady's virtue. Prepare your guts. Duels range from grand justs to less dramatic sword fights or heated staring matches. The goal wasn't always death, but proving you'd risk it. Nothing says, I love you, like risking infection. Some duels were formal, with rules and crowds. Others were spur of the moment, ending in a pond with someone shouting, no regrets. For women, this was flattering but tiring. A stroll through the market could spark a brawl over your scarf. Some ladies claimed poor vision. I was eyeing the turnip stall, not that knight's chin. Not all duels were romantic. Some were political or over mispronounced names. But when love was at stake, it felt bigger, especially when the prize was a mildly pleased lady and a slim shot at her hand. So, if your beloved eyed another, the medieval fix was clear: challenge, fight, bleed a bit, win her heart. In medieval times, love and war were more than metaphors. They were twins. To show true devotion, you didn't send a note or buy a pie. You strapped on 50 pounds of armor and pinned her favorite scarf to your chest. This was wearing her colors, a common practice. Knights tied a lady's token, a ribbon, veil, or lace, to their armor before battle or tournaments. It said, I fight for her honor. Also, I rock pink. It wasn't just romantic, it was tactical. Her colors could boost a knight's status, win patronage, or earn a pie on return. But there was a risk. You had to look noble, even if her token was, say, stitched with roses and smelled like her wash. Some knights went overboard, wearing her entire sleeve, flapping awkwardly and snagging on spears. One hapless knight tied a sash to his helm, which fell over his eyes mid-joust, causing a headache. Colors mattered: red for love, blue for fidelity, green for hope, or, in some places, a hint she was seeing other knights. Critics called it silly, saying warriors looked like laundry racks, but those critics rarely got dates. Coincidence? Doubtful. Some ladies embroidered messages into tokens. Win for me, or don't die again. To outsiders, it seemed absurd. Tough knights with floral scarves. But to them, it was pride, a loud way to say, I love her, and I'll get mildly stabbed for it. If you fancied someone in medieval times, you didn't text or slip into their scrolls. You stood under their window at midnight, singing loudly, hoping they were awake and their dad wasn't a light sleeper. Serenading was a top romantic gesture, second only to surviving a fight. A good ballad could win hearts, favor, or at least a shy smile at church. The key was good. Most suitors weren't musicians. They had lutes, clunky, pear-shaped things tuned by luck, and vague ideas of melody. Medieval music was chant-heavy, not pop hits. They sang of roses, moons, and eternal vows, sometimes in Latin for gravitas, sometimes in French for flair, or in local tongues sounding like they choked on rye. One baker's son in Lyon tried a midnight serenade with a borrowed harp. His voice broke on verse 2, the harp snapped on 3. Ladies were to listen quietly, maybe peek out, and never laugh, even if it sounded like a sick goat. Etiquette meant dropping a token, a ribbon, flower, or polite cough. A decent tune could win affection. A bad one earned a bucket of water from above. The medieval no thanks. Still, singing your heart into the night was heroic. Even if your audience was just a grumpy owl and a very bored cat to eye in an age without apps, lotions, or toothbrushes, medieval singles turned to nature, specifically their spice rack. A weird but common dating tip? Rub herbs on your face. The logic: smell nice, glow a bit, get betrothed. Love Guide swore by it. Mint sparked affection. Sage melted tough hearts. Rosemary boosted flirtation. Smell like a garden, and someone might wed you, or at least trail you curiously. Men were told to mash herbs into a paste and rub it on their cheeks. Women dabbed herbal water on their faces like medieval skincare. Results? Spotty. Picture arriving at a banquet with dill oil dripping down your chin and parsley in your hair. Charming in theory, alarming in reality. One guide said to wash your face in rosemary at dawn to shine fair to all who see. Noble, until you realize they meant soaking in it. The rich used rosewater or saffron blends to smell like they didn't herd goats. The poor used onions or whatever didn't draw flies. Romantic. This spurred industries. Apothecaries sold love bombs from secret recipes, promising irresistibility. Results varied. Side effects included sneezing and cow attraction. In a world where saying, I love you, could spark scandal, a duel, or a tense supper with her lordly father, medieval romantics turned to something safer and sneakier: flowers. Welcome to the floral code of courtship, where a single bloom held more weight than a poem and fewer typos. Each flower had meaning: red roses for passion, daisies for innocence, lavender for, I'd woo you, but let's not get excommunicated. Bouquets were like riddles, coated with petals and nerves. Want a hint at love, but stay safe? Send tulips, adoration, and carnations, fascination. Need to apologize for eyeing her cousin? Add white violets. My bad. Want to end it softly? Yellow tulips, fancy rejection. Manuscripts detailed flower meanings, turning gardens into emotional traps. A rose in your hair screamed romance. A thistle on her doorstep said, I'd rather wed a mule. Ladies replied in kind. A returned bloom meant interest. A tossed one meant no. One noblewoman sent a wilted weed with a note. I prefer priests. Ouch. If your flowers got eaten by her goat, love was doomed. Tournaments saw knights wear bouquets from ladies, not just for style, but as loyalty badges, or an attempt to look dashing while swinging a club. Dancing in medieval times wasn't just fun. It was romantic strategy, played with feet, pride, and knowing where not to put your hands. In noble circles, dance was a rare way to mingle with the opposite sex, as long as you didn't grin too much, sweat too hard, or touch beyond fingertips. Court dances weren't twirls or dips, but slow, gliding steps with extra bows. The bass dance, literally low dance, meant sliding in neat rows, gazing politely while screaming inside over a brushed sleeve. Still, it thrilled. Fingertip contact was practically a betrothal. One extra step, and your kin were planning your wedding. Dances carried signals. A long look during a turn said, I'm into you. A missed step. I'm not worthy. Stepping on her foot? You're done. Village dances, like the carol, were looser, with singing and circling, but chaperones watched like hawks. Music came from minstrels, pipes, or a drum that might have been a soup pot. Move out of sync, and you risked shame, injury, or ripping a lady's gown, a crime in some regions. Love guides suggested watching a partner's dance to gauge character. Smooth meant reliable, wild meant passionate. Flopping like a sick goose meant not ready for love. You've penned poems, sung under her window, worn her scarf, and avoided death by lance. Well done. Now comes the final hurdle, her family. Winning her heart was only half the game. The other half was persuading her parents, especially her father, that you were rich enough, sane enough, and not currently banished by the church. It wasn't romantic. It meant dowries, land talks, and awkward dinners where everyone acted like it wasn't a feudal merger. Families wanted proof of worth. Got cows? Land? A few teeth? The medieval, are you stable? The answer was often no. Some demanded gifts, not just for love, but to show commitment. A suitor might offer wheat, a cape, or a whittled bowl. Rich ones brought stallions, coins, or a whole cow. Want to impress? Bring 2 cows and a priest to vouch for you. In villages, it was simpler but still tough. A father might judge your grip, your boots, or your skill at brawling over a fence line. Mothers were trickier, testing you with riddles, church visits, or surviving a feast without flinching. One mother only approved men who could weave straw. Efficient. Even if they liked you, alliances mattered. Marriage wasn't just love. It was a deal for her family's pasture. Pass their tests. Brave, respectful, not broke, and you might get a single nod. That was your cue to wed. To a Viking, death wasn't the end. It was the start of a grander voyage. Life, with its war cries, mead halls, and sea journeys, was just a test. What came after mattered most. For the Norse, the afterlife had many paths, based on how you lived and died. Die bravely, sword in hand, and Valkyries, Odin's fierce maids, might pick you from the battlefield for Valhalla, his Asgard hall. There, warriors trained for Ragnarok, the final clash, fighting by day, feasting by night, repeating forever. But not all reached Valhalla. Freyja, goddess of love and war, took half the slain to her hall, Folkvanger. Others went to Helheim, ruled by Hel, for those who died of illness, age, or dishonor. Not torture, but no feast either. Funerals mattered. A warrior for Valhalla couldn't just be dumped in a ditch. The Norse planned burials with care, ensuring honor, memory, and gear for the next world. Cremation on a blazing ship or burial in a mound with weapons, food, and treasures showed respect and fear of restless spirits. A botched funeral could haunt the living. Viking funerals conjure images of burning ships sailing into sunsets. Hollywood amps it up, but it's rooted in truth. To Vikings, ships weren't just for raids. They were sacred bridges to other realms. High-status dead, chieftains, warriors, or noble women, were often buried in or with ships. Rituals varied by region, but the goal was clear: send the soul off grandly. In Norway and Sweden, they dug ship-shaped trenches, placed a vessel inside, and laid the body with grave goods, swords, shields, food, even sacrificed thralls. The ship was then buried under stones and soil, forming a mound. Some, like the Oseberg and Gokstad ships, were found intact, true monuments. Fiery sea burials were rarer for coastal elites. A body, goods, and all went on a boat, pushed out, and burned with tar. Fire purified, warded off spirits, and ensured a one-way trip. Ships were costly, so only the rich got such send-offs. Commoners had simpler graves with modest gifts. Still, the ship was the Norse death icon, carrying souls from Midgard to eternity, whether by earth or flame. Cremation was the Viking Age's most common funeral rite, especially early on, and the Norse made it epic. Burning wasn't just disposal, it was transformation. Fire purified, its smoke carrying the soul to Odin, Freyja, or beyond. The body, dressed finely, was placed on a wooden pyre with care, surrounded by prized items, weapons for warriors, jewels for women, tools or pets. These weren't just keepsakes, they were afterlife gear. Feasts or rituals often came first, with mourners gathering for days to share tales, sing, or sacrifice animals. Horses or dogs, valued companions, might join the pyre. The fire roared, smoke soaring, a sacred bridge between worlds. Ashes and remnants, bones, charred swords, were collected, sometimes buried in urns or under runestones. Cremation wasn't grim, it was a glorious exit, a shout to the gods. This soul mattered, now carried skyward. You wouldn't raid without a sword, so why face the afterlife empty-handed? Viking burials packed grave goods, tools, weapons, symbols for the next world. Warriors got swords, axes, shields, sometimes bent to kill them for the journey, also deterring thieves. Rich Vikings had gold, coins, or silk. Women got brooches, keys, or looms, marking their roles. Kids had toys or small animals. Bigger items, horses, dogs, boats, showed status. In rare cases, human sacrifices, often slaves, joined high-status burials, a grim nod to power. Goods weren't just practical. A broken comb meant cleanliness, a hook survival, a Thor's hammer protection. Choices were personal, varying by region. Sweden's boat graves were lavish, Iceland's simpler. These goods told stories of identity, value, and death, a final nod to worth, maybe a ticket to Valhalla. Viking funerals were no quick farewell. They were grand, multi-day spectacles of ceremony and flair. The body was washed, dressed finely, sometimes masked to preserve its look, often by women, spiritual guardians of life and death. Vulvas, priestesses, might chant or purify. Family, warriors, even villages gathered, blending grief and celebration, like a wake with mead-fueled toasts. A sacrificer, maybe a chieftain, led rites, offering animals or, rarely, humans, horses or slaves for elite burials. Skalds sang the dead's deeds, cementing their legacy. The burial, cremation, ship, or mound, was the peak, with mourners shouting farewells or adding coins, amulets. Feasts followed, with meat and mead, honoring the dead and bonding the living. These rites processed grief, secured heirs, and kept order, a legacy, not just a burial. Human sacrifice, though rare, chills modern minds. In Norse belief, the afterlife mirrored life, so a chieftain might need servants beyond death. Ibn Fadlan, a 10th century Arab, saw a Viking funeral on the Volga, describing a female slave, the angel of death, ritually killed, drugged, paraded, strangled, stabbed, and burned with her master. Brutal, yet some saw it as duty or honor. Animals, horses, dogs, were more common, symbolizing strength or loyalty. As Christianity spread, human sacrifice faded, clerics condemned it, and kings banned it for European ties. By the 11th century, it was gone, but it remains a dark echo of Norse hierarchy, where elites took people, willing or not, into death. Burial mounds were Viking funerals' grand finale, towering earthworks screaming legacy. These hogars, from pre-Viking times, became Norse art. Built for the elite, their size showed power. A fjordside mound marked a sea lord, a hilltop one claimed a valley. Some reused old mounds for ancestral ties. Bodies went in chambers or ships with goods, textiles, armor, tools, then covered with earth and stones. Some span 100 feet, ringed with ship-shaped stones or topped with poles to guide spirits or deter robbers. Mounds were political, signaling dominance even in death. Communities gathered there for oaths or festivals, making the dead part of the land's soul. Today, Scandinavia's mounds remain, some excavated, revealing treasures and Norse echoes, monuments to immortality. Viking women weren't just mourners, they were central. The Oseberg ship burial held 2 high-status women, possibly a vulva, buried with silks, a wagon, and food, regal splendor. Vulvas, with divine ties, prepared bodies, led rites, and held rare power, respected even by warriors. Shield maidens, like the Burka burial's armed woman, got warrior honors, showing valor cross-gender. Yet, female slaves were sometimes sacrificed for male elites, a brutal hierarchy. Women could be mourners, priestesses, victims, or revered dead, their graves rich with status, hinting at a society both patriarchal and fluid. Viking funerals blazed until Christianity dimmed them. By the 10th century, heaven, hell, and resurrection replaced Valhalla and Helheim. Cremation became heresy. Burial, facing east, was demanded. Kings like Harold Bluetooth pushed Christianity for alliances and power. Cremation and sacrifices were banned, vulvas silenced, mounds abandoned or built over with churches. Some blended faiths, burying crosses with pagan goods. In Iceland, old rites lingered into the 12th century. By the Viking Age's end, burning ships and smoky pyres were gone, replaced by crosses and quiet graves. Yet, mounds endure, and Valhalla's echo lingers in film and lore, a people who faced death with fire, steel, and wind-carried songs. Venetian masks began not with drama or festivity, but with power, secrecy, and the urge to be someone else. By the 13th century, Venice, a trade hub of wealth and hierarchy, craved escape. Masks offered it. A 1268 law banned masked gambling, showing anonymity's pull. Carnival, pre-Lent revelry, made masks soar. Social lines blurred, sins were briefly pardoned, and all, from nobles to peasants, donned disguises. Masks weren't just costumes, they were tools. They let rigid Venetians shed class, gender, or name. A maid could mock her lord, a lady slip into a tavern, a monk wander unseen. The bada, a blank white mask with a cloak and tricorn, was eerie, functional, letting wearers speak or eat incognito. In votes, it was mandatory for anonymity. Masks mirrored Venice's contradictions, rich yet covert, pious yet indulgent, rigid yet appearance-obsessed. In a city of spies and secret trials, hiding your face was defense and play. Carnival turned Venice into a stage, every citizen an actor. Rules, hierarchy, etiquette, church scrutiny fell under music, laughter, and planned chaos. Documented in 1296, Carnival likely tied to pagan role reversal festivals. By the Renaissance, it drew Europe's elite. Masked balls filled palaces, gondolas glowed with lanterns, streets buzzed with jugglers and plays. Carnival was a pressure valve for a controlled city, letting affairs, satire, and grievances bloom under anonymity. Clergy joined, discreetly. The elite allowed it, not rebellion, but managed freedom. Laws limited mask wearing to December 26th to Shrove Tuesday, banning them in churches or gambling dens by day. Rules were often dodged with Venetian flair. Carnival wasn't about being someone else, but showing your true self, free of consequence, with a mask and music making anything possible. The bada, with its stark white face and sharp jaw, was Venice's iconic mask, freedom and control in one. Its shape allowed speech and eating without removal, paired with a cloak and hat for a uniform look. In votes, it ensured secrecy, leveling rank. But it was also weaponized. Nobles schemed, seduced, or dealt unseen. It offered deniability, blurring duty and vice. To citizens, a bada was unnerving, noble, spy, or thief. Its blankness made it Venice's soul, elegant, mysterious, menacing. The Moretta, a women's black velvet mask, was control incarnate. Held by a button in the teeth, it silenced the wearer, enhancing eyes and hair. In a society wary of female speech, it made women alluring enigmas, moving through masses or trysts unseen. Courtesans used it for anonymity, ladies for scandal-proofing. It gave freedom and reinforced control, a paradox of agency and silence. By the 18th century, it faded as Venice declined. Today, it's rare, a silent relic of a troubling custom. Commedia dell'arte masks, from lively theater, spilled into carnival. Harlequin's sly grin, Pantaloon's hooked nose, Illinois Dator's pompous brow. These stock characters mocked lust, greed, or folly. Actors tailored satire to local scandals. And during carnival, citizens donned these masks to jest, flirt, or vent. They let Venetians mock officials or lovers safely, blending art and defiance. The city became a stage, every mask a truth-teller through lies. Venice balanced piety and pleasure, and masks tested the church. Carnival's indulgence, drinking, gambling, flirting, was tolerated pre-Lent, a steam valve before fasting. But by the 16th century, masks enabled vice, affairs, theft, heresy. Clerics banned them in holy places, warned of divine wrath. Enforcement was lax. Even bishops hosted masked balls. Plagues brought bans, fearing disease or unrest, but masks always returned. As Enlightenment rose and Venice weakened, Carnival grew secular, less apologetic. The church couldn't unmask Venice's shadowed soul. Masks ruled Venice for centuries: liberty, subversion, sensuality. In 1797, Napoleon crushed the Republic. Carnival and masks, seen as rebellion, were banned. Mask makers faded, streets silenced. For 2 centuries, Carnival slept, preserved in quiet rooms or theater. In 1979, it was reborn for art and tourism. Masks returned as ornate pieces, papier-mâché, ceramic, feathered, gilded, not for rebellion but nostalgia. Volto and Colombina masks, with glitter and filigree, joined commedia characters for photos, not satire. The new carnival was curated, monetized, tourist-heavy. Yet, the spell held. Venice could still be someone else, mysterious and elegant, even with smartphones. Why did Venetians love masks? To escape rigid identities. In a world of class, duty, and gender, masks freed merchants to play rogues, nuns to flirt, nobles to confess flaws. They didn't hide you. They revealed new selves, exploring desires or defying norms. In Venice's watery, illusory world, masks made sense, psychological tools blurring actor and audience. Today, in cosplay or masquerades, masks still empower, letting us speak bolder truths. Their democracy and hierarchy, rebellion and tradition, seductive yet deceptive. In a watched world, they remind us of lost privacy, mystery, and reinvention. A Venetian mask isn't just art, it's a key to shadows, freedom, and human desire's shifting face. Kyoto in the 1860s wasn't a calm city of temples and verse. It was a veiled battlefield. Beneath its sacred eaves and quiet shrines, rebellion brewed. Assassins prowled, bodies floated in streams, and every alley whispered of upheaval. The cause? Japan was fracturing. After 2 centuries of Tokugawa peace, foreign powers, America, Britain, France, forced open its ports. Gunboats broke isolation's illusion. Nationalists rallied under Sano Joy. Revere the emperor, oust the barbarians, a cry for war. Pro-imperial samurai from Choshu and Satsuma flooded Kyoto, the empire's heart, to weaken the shogunate. Every clash, every killing chipped at the status quo. The shogunate, based in Edo, now Tokyo, saw its power mocked in the capital. They sent the Rashigumi, a Ronin militia, to guard the shogun in 1863. But 13 Ronin stayed, seeing Kyoto as destiny. Backed by the Eizu domain, they became the Shinsengumi, patrolling streets, hunting rebels. From quiet capital to internal siege, Kyoto birthed a blue-clad force of chilling resolve. The Shinsengumi started as a scrappy Ronin band, but became Kyoto's feared blade, draped in blue haori, steeped in rebel blood. Leaders Sarazawa Kumo, Kondo Isami, and Hijikata Toshizo, non-samurai, scorned by elites, drove this shift with ferocity. Sarazawa's wild drunken brawls and extortion threatened their legitimacy. Kondo, a Tenin-Rishin Ryu dojo master, and Hijikata, his cold, loyal deputy, purged him in an 1863 night raid, setting a brutal tone: loyalty or death. Under Kondo and Hijikata, a strict code banned desertion, disobedience, or private fights. Penalty: seppuku. Their blue haori with white stripes was a badge and a threat. Not just enforcers, they saw themselves as samurai purists, clinging to Bushido, loyalty, discipline, skill, in a modernizing world. Kyoto shook as they hunted assassins, executed traitors, and reshaped order with each sword swing. The Aikdaya incident of 1864 made the Shinsengumi legends. On a steamy July night, amid Kyoto's lanterns and wooden halls, they struck. Rumors warned of a Chasha-led plot to burn Kyoto and kidnap officials to destabilize the shogunate. Kondo led 10 men, Hijikata reinforcing, to the Aikdaya Inn. Outnumbered, they attacked rebels in a chaotic, lamplit slaughter. Walls broke, screams rang, tatami bled. 7 rebels died, the plot collapsed. 1 Shinsengumi fell, a small price for fame. The shogunate praised them. Citizens saw guardians. Critics called them assassins with badges. To rebels, they were monsters, killing kin for a dying regime. To Kondo and Hijikata, it was purpose, swords drawn for order, never to be sheathed until the shogunate stood or they fell. The Shinsengumi's rise wasn't just force, it was discipline, precision, and terror. They trained in Tenin Rishin Ryu, a lethal sword style for alleys and rooms, not dojos. They ran spies, monks, merchants, tracking names, hideouts, plans. Fear was their blade. Midnight raids, sudden sandals on wood, blue Haori, dragging men to doom. Disobedience meant seppuku. Hijikata, the demon vice commander, enforced it coldly. From 13 ronin, they grew to 200, but spies and weak recruits sparked purges. They fought for a samurai ideal, loyalty over politics, swords over guns, clinging to a fading world as Kyoto trembled. By the late 1860s, the shogunate crumbled under foreign pressure, rebellion, and economic strain. Satsuma and Choshu, once rivals, united for the emperor, arming with rifles and Western tactics. The Shinsengumi's heroic image soured. Brutality, not justice. In 1867, Shogun Yoshinobu resigned, handing power to the emperor, a tactical move. Kyoto turned imperial. The Shinsengumi, now outlaws, fled to Fushimi, refusing to quit. Armed with swords against modern guns, they faced the Boshin War, the last samurai stand, fighting for honor, not victory, in Blue Haori. In January 1868, at Toba Fushimi, the Shinsengumi clashed with imperial forces, Satsuma, Choshu, Tosa, armed with rifles and cannons. In Blue Haori, with katanas and old guns, they were relics. Kondo, slowed by age, and Hijikata, fierce as ever, led a brave but doomed charge. Imperial banners demoralized Tokugawa allies. Some fled, others surrendered. The Shinsengumi fought, broke, retreated in blood and smoke. Toba Fushimi was their death knell. Declared traitors, they fled south, vowing to fight for honor, not triumph. Warriors in a modern war they couldn't win. After Toba Fushimi, the Shinsengumi were fugitives. Kyoto, their city, was imperial. Hijikata led survivors north, joining Tokugawa remnants as the Koyo Chinbutai, chasing a lost cause. Kondo, captured in Edo, was beheaded, his head displayed in Kyoto, a warning. Hijikata, unbowed, moved to Hokkaido's Republic of Ezo, a fleeting loyalist state. There, they made a last stand, swords against rifles, ghosts of a fading era, chasing honor through snow and loss. In 1869, Hokkaido was the Shinsengumi's final refuge. The Republic of Ezo, led by Enomoto Takeaki, was Japan's only republic. Hijikata, now general, led a dwindled band, under 100, weary but resolute. At Hakodate, imperial forces with modern arms crushed them. On June 20th, 1869, Hijikata fell to a bullet, aged 34. His body, lost or secretly buried, left no trace. His final letter sought remembrance, not victory. Ezo fell days later. The Shinsengumi ended. The Meiji era won, samurai faded, but Hijikata's ghost lingered, immortal in honor. The Shinsengumi's legacy outlived their defeat. In Meiji Japan, feudalism fell, swords were banned, and modernity ruled. Yet their story, loyalty, sacrifice, samurai spirit, captivated. Literature, theater, and film cast them as tragic heroes, fighting for a lost ideal. Hijikata's resolve, Kondo's honor, Okita's swordsmanship became legends. Today, their blue Haori, katanas, and loyalty shine in manga, anime, and Kyoto museums. They stood at history's crossroads, swords against guns, tradition against progress. Not just police, they were men choosing honor over ease, loyalty over safety, action over despair, a fading past's eternal echo.